You are now listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. On today's program, we're going to, within a certain set of parameters, we're going to predict the future based on a combination of logical analysis, a review of current events and where these current events are taking us, and then, all importantly, relying on the ability of God supernaturally to communicate to his people. And most often, God communicates to his people through either spokespersons, current events, history, knowledge, various sciences and disciplines. God speaks to us through all of those things. And so you can't ever make the mistake that tragically so many people make this mistake, and they take those qualitative and quantitative categories of information and they diminish them. And you hear Christians say stupid stuff that is not reflective of a biblical worldview whatsoever. You hear them saying stupid stuff like, well, I only, look for answers in the spiritual area. Where on earth does it tell you to only look for answers in the spiritual area? It doesn't. It doesn't say that at all. The Bible doesn't say that at all. There's always, within the context of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, God is continually communicating to us, continually. So, for example, in the book of Proverbs, God is constantly reaching out to us and trying to give us the answers that we need, the guidance that we need. Always, God's trying to do that. But God does not take his answers, his knowledge, his wisdom and guidance. And let's remember something, he's omniscient, all-knowing. God doesn't take his all-knowing capacities and cram them into a little shoebox of understanding, and then say to you erroneously that any information or data or knowledge that comes to you that is out of the shoebox of conventional understanding, you are not allowed to pay attention to that. You should never look at that. You should not incorporate that in your analysis regarding any situation. God never says that to us. When you hear that kind of talk, that is the language. Let me give you like a brief linguistics lesson. And I'm a guy who I know the English language, but I was raised to speak the French language because of my grandmother, who was born in France, and my grandfather was a soldier in World War I. They fell in love in France, and he brought her back to the USA. Okay, so they thought, well, this is going to be a no-brainer. We'll teach all our grandchildren French. Well, no matter how much I learned from them, and I learned something, I could not speak French. I couldn't take that leap into the next level. And I thought, everybody thought, well, gee, he's going to have an advantage when it comes to learning a language because he got a head start at our house. But that wasn't the case at all. I didn't have any head start. I was like literally incompetent when it came to learning the French language. And there's no other way to say it. So I remember as I was going into my senior year at the University of Missouri, I remember that being short-term intelligent and long-term moron, you know what that means? I'll explain it to you. It means you gotta, your plan is built on the faulty premise that you should take action that only applies to the moment, to the now moment, like living now. And don't worry about the long-term consequences. That's what is being instilled in young adults and adults everywhere. This, now moment mentality, where nobody cares about the far future and their only concern is the immediate present. That's how little children think. And when you're finally mature, psychologists say, and you can take some of what they say with a grain of salt, but psychologists say when you finally mature, one of the marks of psychological maturity is that you learn how to delay gratification or postpone gratification. And if you can master yourself, you will do better in life. Now that goes against our entire culture, which demands that in all areas we satisfy ourselves or we gratify ourselves right now for the moment. So everybody's living for the moment, which is really a suicidal path. So being a fool in this area, and I try to be quick to admit my deficits as well as, what I do right. But in this area, in college in my senior year, man, I had blown it because year after year, I had postponed taking all the French classes, which were not an elective. They were mandatory. I needed a certain amount of hours to be proficient in a foreign language. And so due to my grandparents, I chose French, and I kept sliding the French classes. I kept pushing them into the future, pushing them into the future, so I could have high grades in the short term, as a sophomore, et cetera, and so on. I could have high grades, and that looked great. Problem is, I was storing up the day of wrath for myself, and I'll never forget going into my senior year at the university, where I had piled up all my French classes and all my math classes, which for me were the two hardest subjects I could take. And you can imagine what happened. It was like Waterloo. It wasn't pretty. So the guy who supposedly, I had a great French accent, that the professor commented. That part was true, because I wasn't learning from Americans. I was learning from my French grandmother. The problem is I knew nothing about the French language. So I had to read the book, and I couldn't read the book. It was so boring. And then I had to prepare for the exams, and then the teacher locked in on me. They always do. You know how this goes. If you're like striking out a lot in any school or grade, there's a high probability that the teacher is going to lock in on you, and in their mind, it's going to motivate you to study it, because they're trying to play you not to want to be embarrassed, which it works in some respects. But I couldn't fathom the thought of being humiliated and looking like a moron again in the French class. So she asked me questions in French and English regularly. And then it got to it that I couldn't answer any of them. Well, actually, I couldn't answer any of them even on day one. No, I could say, "Bonjour, Mr. McGUIRE. Bonjour, Madame," whatever her name was. And the response from the class was laughter. So I got a little taste of my own medicine. Some of you remember my story where I took on the two evangelical Christians in debate class who really knew nothing. And I exposed how little they knew. Well, here's some relief for you. As you sow, so shall you reap. And I reaped a bitter harvest in terms of my not willing to pursue French aggressively and storing it up for the last year, where, it was do or die time. And now it was I, singular, me, moi. I remembered one French word, moi, meaning me. Some of you know that. That don't try to graduate based on the fact that you can say moi synonymously for the English me. It doesn't fly. So I was ridiculed on a regular basis, because on a regular basis I couldn't answer anything in French. So I knew the only way I would be able to graduate is I'd have to give up a couple of summers to do this. And I wasn't looking forward to it, because I knew inside myself just absolutely how little I knew of French. And then all the heavy-duty math classes were looming on the horizon, and I knew once again how little I knew, and how I was playing this game of just pushing these graduate degree required courses I was constantly pushing into the future. That's getting short-term gratification, but in reality, you're not going to be around for long-term gratification, because you don't know anything and you didn't do what you were supposed to do. Guilty as charged. So, it was very painful. Eventually, I solved it by taking hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of French, which was like committing suicide. I mean, I couldn't stand it. Because I did ask the question, and this is not an excuse for my stupidity, but I did ask the probably often asked question. I said it something like this. I'm sure I was very transparent to them. I'm sure I said something to the effect of, I realize we have to choose a graduate school, and we have to choose a language in order to graduate. Every student needs to fulfill their language requirements. And I was told from a young boy, which is true, I was told from a young boy, I guess in junior high school, that, and even earlier with my grandparents, I was told constantly from educators that French is the second most spoken language in the world. And the most important language you could possibly learn would be to learn French, because every nation on earth, for the most part, either speaks English as a second language or they speak French. So since you already speak English, it would be very beneficial to you in any job market and any job you might want to get to learn how to speak French, because French is the second most spoken language in the world. And that's because the French Empire at one time went out and conquered everything. So French was it. Okay, well, I said to them that I really didn't think that the day would ever come when I would need to speak French, or I would be in a position where I would have to know and speak French and understand it. And that was basically true. Why? Because as it turns out, at least in my path in life, going back decades ago, maybe because I moved to Southern California, Spanish, for all practical purposes, Spanish, or one of the South American nations, Spanish was the most spoken language in places like California, many other states, and now all across the United States. It's Spanish that's spoken everywhere. And French, just in a couple of lifetimes, has diminished to a scarcity. Well, that doesn't mean anything. You're required to take a certain amount of hours to get your language credits for a liberal arts student. So, you either do it or you don't get your degree. So I had to learn the painful way. I had to spend so many extra hours of agonizing pain and boredom, where if I was not into short-term gratification, but if I was looking at the big picture like a psychologically mature person does, I would never have allowed all those, oh my God, I get my head spins thinking of it. I wouldn't have allowed all those thousands of hours of French piling up, waiting to devour me like some kind of ravenous beast, except the beast speaks French. Okay, enough of that. But what I was trying to get to, and then got lost in the wilderness, was the fact that what marks maturity and self-discipline, and what enables you and gives you the ability to meet your goals, to be victorious, and so many other things, the mastering the self-discipline dynamic of learning how to delay immediate gratification for long-term gratification. They used to teach that to students in the sexual area very, very lightly, because that used to be a subject that was given over to the parents to teach. Now, anybody who knows even remotely anything about what is in the content of sex ed for students beginning in first and second grade, yes, that's right. It is so pornographic. It is so pornographic visually, words, the description of all the myriad activities that are aggressively promoted as the new normal, and they pound it into your little kid's head that you are somehow abnormal if you don't do all these things that they tell you you should do. You're an abnormal. And so if you want to be part of the in-group, the normal, then you're going to do all these things we're showing you how to do. And it's every bit as bad as I'm alluding to, and 1,000 times worse than what I'm alluding to. So how can you not know about it? I talk to people all the time who are teachers, who are parents, and they don't believe me when I tell them. I have looked at the material because I went to Christian websites that I respect, like Dr. James Dobson of Focus on the Family. And yes, he warns you, but he also says, if you're embarrassed and upset as an adult about looking at this stuff, he says to the Christian readers, he says, just think about how awful it must be for your kids to have to watch and listen to all of this stuff. It's a nightmare. And I'm going to stop right there because I don't want to devote a program on it. I have in the past. And I have going way back to the years where Dr. Dobson was a regular guest on my show. He publicly endorsed my ministry, and I worked with his ministry, Focus on the Family. I worked with him, and yes, I worked with his wife and him on many, many projects. And the name of his show, which aired on our radio station at least twice a day, was Focus on the Family. And he was trying to warn people back then. Today, it's a moral holocaust. Okay, you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Be sure to visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. We'll be back in just a moment. You are listening into the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. So I want to transition here to the necessity, the absolute total necessity of unlocking or unleashing all the God-given abilities that are packed within you. When you were born, you were downloaded by God, the biblical God, the supreme being, the creator, capital C. You were downloaded by the creator with a massive amounts of talents, abilities, resources, gifts, giftings. Some of these gifts and giftings are supernatural abilities. Some of them are abilities that you have to develop and grow in life. And some of them are what we would call or could call natural abilities. You know, look at your own life. Everybody, I don't care what a loser you may secretly think that you are. And every one of us, by the way, no matter how big a front or a facade we may put on, every one of us struggles from time to time, some more than others. Every one of us struggles with secret feelings or secret perceptions that we're losers, that we're defective, that we're not good enough, not smart enough, or whatever it is, that somehow we're lacking. And nobody, I don't care how wealthy, how famous, or whatever, they suffer. Some of those people, not all the time, but some of those people who we celebrate, or some of us celebrate as superstars, etc., are the most plagued by these feelings of inadequacy and feelings of self-doubt. Why? Because we are all the DNA genetic, I'll probably, for crying out loud, this gets us to be ridiculous. Would some of you out there mark the date of this show? Because I don't know what day. It could be going out tomorrow. It could be airing 2 days from now. I don't know the exact date. But would you please write down this show, the date of it, the title of it, and when you saw it, and then send me an email at paulmcguire.us and let me know if they allowed it to play the social media that you're looking at it on. Or I'm especially interested in YouTube and Google, because no exaggeration, it's like 6 or 7 emails a week from YouTube on Google telling me that their advertisers wouldn't like my subject matter. Okay. Now, no matter how you analyze it, there's nothing that I've said in today's program that I'm aware of that would qualify for me to be legitimately censored or demonetized or deplatformed. Okay. But I just was going to say the word epidemic purely in a generic sense, and definitely not under any sense of the imagination, definitely not in any sense related to medicine, medical procedures, diseases, or anything of that nature. Okay, so are we clear? I was about to use the word epidemic as in, we're seeing an epidemic of people going back to cigarette smoking or something. Now, in no way, shape, or form was I going to use that term epidemic in the sense of even remotely medical, pharmaceutical, or whatever. Okay, so are we clear? So most often it's AI that's doing the initial reviewing of a program, anybody's program. And the expression in the computer industry is machine read or machine reading. The idea is that an AI, an artificially intelligent computer bot, will instantaneously scan all the words or symbols in any given video or content where somebody's speaking or writing or visuals. And if any of that content goes into the areas that they have deemed to be worthy of you being censored and taken down from their media platforms. The AI will make the decision because I don't think it's been programmed yet to take things in context. That will change quickly. So I realized I had to once again stop the normal flow of my conversation and communicating. And I had to deliberately waste all this time explaining to you the dynamics of what is the real reason that I get censored the majority of times, which has nothing to do with my content violating, let's say, Google's policies or YouTube's policies. But if you have a machine or AI, they can easily confuse making precision choices and precision decisions on what to censor and what not to censor. They have difficulty making precision analysis of your usage of words and phrases. Okay. So therefore, you could be using a word which is perfectly legitimate, which would not be in anybody's dictionary, mental or otherwise, something that would call for being censored. And yet, if the AI machine, the bot, the algorithm, can't distinguish between a precision analysis and the real intent of the author of the words, and what is the majority of the listening or viewing audience, how are they going to internally translate the words that the speaker, that's me, is using? Well, I would say that 99 to 100% of you are using the traditional English language and the traditional English language dictionary as your mechanism for interpreting accurately what I'm saying. And unless you just came to America, and unless you don't speak English very well, you're not going to understand the nuances. So what I'm telling you is that this censorship thing is like handing over a lifetime of research and study and multiple degrees, like in theology, the author of 36 books, a major contributor in a major Bible published by Thomas Nelson Publishers, in which I did all the in-depth study notes from Genesis to Revelation, which adds up to be about 500 pages alone. And I did all the Hebrew, Greek, and Latin word study explanations from Genesis to Revelation, and so many other things, okay, which validate my credentials as an informed commentator and a highly educated commentator. But all of that stuff up gets burned up by the AI machine reading bot that will misinterpret what I'm actually saying with what they, in their wildest psychotic imagination, might be thinking, and which is also a total departure from what 99% of the listeners, how they're understanding what I'm saying perfectly fine. So I am the victim. Yes, I am. And I don't play the victim card very often, but this time I am going to do it. I am the victim of indiscriminate, wanton, psychotic censorship on the level of what happened in the Third Reich. And that's true. Now, you may not like the last couple of sentences I said, but the more important thing is this: is what I said not true? When you examine what happened in terms of censorship, surveillance, the many different industries, when you examine what happened in Germany, Nazi Germany, and you compare it to what's happening in America, is what I just said, is it true or not? The question is not whether or not you personally like it or not. The question is not whether it personally agrees or disagrees with your politics. Those are not the main issue. The main issue is what I said truthful or not? And the answer is unequivocally, what I said was very truthful. In fact, what I said was understated substantially. In other words, I chose to minimize the impactful nature of the full truth. Okay, I chose to censor myself largely in the perhaps vain hope that this might be circulated and cause people to think. in which I need your help to spread this message far and wide by going to paulmcguire.us or going to the social media page you're watching or listening to this on and become an electronic follower and liker of the Paul McGUIRE Report. All right, let's keep diving deeper. Now, this is historically a fact. It's not conjecture. It's not wild. And by the way, I read the fact checkers, not regarding me, but I read when I come across somebody's article or statement and that individual or group is being bombarded with commentary from fact checkers, I initially know something dirty is going on. That's the clue. And then I read the fact checkers. And I would say 100% of the time, when I read the fact checkers, I read somebody who's on the payroll of a big globalist corporation and is paid to discredit, to use Big Brother propaganda techniques, scientific mind control, and an assortment of advertising, manipulation, distraction, and other techniques designed to erode confidence in the reader in any given spokesman or spokeswoman or commentator or author or cultural leader. The purpose of the fact checking and fact checkers is to undermine. It's a propaganda tool designed to undermine free speech. So the way it plays out, it's kind of like a chessboard or a checkerboard. On one half of the board, you have a billion-dollar globalist corporation or an assortment of billion-dollar globalist corporations that control media, TV, video, the internet, big tech, versus the common man or woman, the individual, versus truth tellers. And you have a massive gargantuan machine with endless resources attacking for the purpose of destroying any truth teller, anybody who's trying to be an authentic and integrity-based whistleblower. They are under attack. So what you're looking at, what is being revealed to you if you're operating your mind in the intended perception modality that God created it in, what's happening right before your eyes is you are watching, if you're looking carefully, you're watching a step-by-step how-to manual in how to undermine the truth with lies, how to pervert the truth with lies, how to destroy free speech while claiming erroneously to be a defender of free speech, how to assault, rape, and murder like a serial killer, your constitutional rights like free speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion are being assaulted and decimated, while at the same time, the financiers and the executioners, no pun intended, of this assault on your constitutional rights are allowed to illegitimately and dishonestly and completely void of any integrity. They're allowed to employ every deceptive trick in the book to obliterate from the national consciousness any well-founded argument, any well-founded debating point. So, for example, take any particular issue, like the issue of global warming. And let's remember factually, and the fact checkers will leave this out because they're dishonest fact checkers. They shouldn't even be called fact checkers because they're not checking for the facts. They're checking to see if there's any truth in what they're attacking. And if they happen to discover truth in what they're attacking, then their job is to destroy the communication, eradicate it. In the same way, in a liberal, he was a liberal, but he was a brilliant science fiction writer, Ray Bradbury, who wrote Fahrenheit 451. And in that novel, whenever the fire department was called out, it was never called out to put out fires in homes, etc. In Bradbury's dystopian novel, the purpose of the fire department was to go and respond to a fire alarm, and that would be a call for the fire department to search and seize any books, any books, any magazines, any literature, any spoken or written word that might be hidden in an ordinary house or building. The job of the fire department was to search and find hidden books like the Bible, like the Old Testament, the New Testament, classic literature, and so on. And then they would amass a giant pile of all the books that they found hidden away in homes. And then they would pour gasoline on all the books, light a match, and they would light and ignite a giant bonfire consisting of burning books in front of the homes. And that, again, the number one job of the fire department in this futuristic dictatorship was to find any hidden books, pour gasoline on them, and burn them into ashes. And they would do this, and they would annually burn millions and millions of books a year. Whether it was a Bible, whether it was classics like The Old Man and the Sea, whether it was anything, a book on anything had to be burned because all books were outlawed. That, my friends, is precisely and exactly what the role of what big tech and our Orwellian Big Brother society falsely calls fact checkers does. A fact checker is not what he or she claims to be. A fact checker is no more interested in the truth or facts any more than a member or captain of the fire department in Ray Bradbury's science fiction novel, Fahrenheit 451. A fire department and the fire chief were no more concerned about whether the books contained truth or lies. That wasn't even an issue. The only thing the fire department was interested in was finding books, even the Bible, or great books of literature like the Greek classics or whatever. The only mission that the fire department wanted to carry out was to search aggressively in every home if somebody called in to rat on somebody who might have hidden books, find all the books they could, and then confiscate the books, put the books in a pile, pour gasoline on the books, and then burn them into ashes. Now think for a moment about how it would look if you were standing in the crowd watching the fire department perform their duties in Fahrenheit 451. Think and feel and experience all the emotions that would be going through your mind and body. And then look in the eye of your imagination at these fire department firemen and women with their shiny red fire trucks, the ladders, the hoses, the thousands of gallons of water they would shoot out of the hoses, and analyze it yourself as a free-thinking, independent individual. And you would see that what you're looking at is essentially what George Orwell called in his book, 1984, Ruled by Big Brother, that people who hid books from the authorities, like the Bible, would be in the novel Big Brother guilty of what were called thought crimes. A thought crime is when you choose to think differently than your programming. A thought crime is when you depart from groupthink to think as an individual. That's a thought crime. Every dictatorial, totalitarian regime in history and in our present time has a category of people, men and women, that the dictatorship government isolates by calling them thought criminals who are guilty of thought crimes. And they're always either put to death or punished severely. So in the case of Ray Bradbury's famous novel, the fire department aggressively searches homes and office buildings and every empty churches and anything. And if they ever find books, they confiscate them, put them in a pile, pour gasoline on the pile of books, and then burn them to flames. Now, unless you're crazy, unless you're a sociopath, unless you're a psychopath, unless you're a degenerate of the highest order, unless you have totally lost the capacity to have an honest intellectual thought, to conduct any form of rational intellectual analysis based on historical precedent, based on current events, based on the study of history, unless you have allowed yourself to become incapacitated, as when comes to matters of analysis, logic, reason, and review, you would have to honestly say that the people that are called firemen or firewomen in Ray Bradbury's novel, Fahrenheit 451, are not, in terms of real facts, historically or culturally authenticated firemen or firewomen. They're not in the very least firemen or firewomen. A legitimate fireman or firewoman actually puts out fires so the fires will not kill, burn, and destroy people or destroy their property. So an authentic fireman seeks to use water hoses and other tools to eradicate fires and their destructive power, to keep homes from burning, to keep buildings from burning, to keep people from burning to death. So firemen in the real world, not a fantasy world, are doing a good service to the community. But as warned about in George Orwell's 1984, as warned about in Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, as warned about by Fahrenheit 451, written by Ray Bradbury, officials like the fire department, consisting of firemen and firewomen, are not authentically firemen or firewomen based on the historical precedent. They are nothing more than wolves in sheep's clothing. They are modern censors who dress up as if they were a help or an aid to the community, when in reality their sole function is to destroy what should be deemed the most precious to any thriving community. And what should be most precious to any thriving community? It should be the existing and the flourishing of free thought that builds, that contributes, that creates authentic teamwork, that facilitates loving your neighbor as yourself, that empowers certain government agencies like firemen and firewomen to have the tools and financing they need to put out dangerous fires. And so, in the final analysis, there's something that every society, every good society, every healthy society would cherish, value, empower, and nurture. But in America today, like in the futuristic dystopia of Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, we have all these people who are financed by secretive globalist billionaires like George Soros, by Gates, and all the others, who secretly finance radical organizations, radical demonstrators, radical fact checkers, and radical censors that are named all these counterfeit names so that their true purpose and agenda is remained in a concealed manner before the public eye. These people, when you look at their historical biographies, when you look at their documented personal histories, these people are narcissists of the worst kind. They are the most perverse of all hate-filled communist revolutionaries who burn, who steal, who destroy with no conscience. And therefore, a fact checker is nothing more or nothing less than an agent of a hidden and covert, widespread totalitarian movement that is gaining the inertia and critical mass to explode their privately financed armies and censors into a full-blown fireball of unholy destruction in which all that is good is burnt, all that is true and decent is hit with flamethrowers, all that is life-sustaining, life-nurturing, all that is positive, all that is healthy, all that empowers creativity, all that releases joy, all that releases the future and a hope for a future, all that promises to be a firm foundation for things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and all the other safeguards that our founding fathers embedded in our Constitution and Bill of Rights. All of this is under attack covertly by what could be described as an unholy, demonically influenced, invisible army. An invisible army which seeks to demolish, engulf, and burn to a crisp all that is good, all that is eternal. And so I warn you about it with every fiber of my being, fighting off innumerable attacks that you will never know about, and some I can't hide, like the constant warfare against my physical health, the authenticity of EMF death threats targeting me specifically, and how I was literally, supernaturally, and miraculously delivered from an instantaneous death, which targeted me because I dared to speak the truth in love for the benefit of others, and because I dared to speak the truth because it was the truth. And there's much more, but I will pass on that. But you need to know, when I ask you to watch my back, I'm not asking you that request frivolously. I'm not asking you that request to generate sympathetic feelings on your part. I'm asking for you to participate in that action call of being a spiritual warrior for me, my family, and everybody associated with this ministry, because we are right smack in the middle of a life and death spiritual war. And it may be a game to many of the people you know because they've never tasted the taste of the battlefield. They've never smelled the smells of the battlefield. So to them, talking about a spiritual battle is like a luxury discussion that they talk from the safety and confines of the theological cruise ship that they sail. Well, I'm not a Disney cruise ship that you sail. I'm a real person, flesh and blood, with a real heart. I have real vulnerabilities, but I also have real assets that are so strong and powerful that I think my enemies would stagger if they knew what certain actions would entail. And I'll leave it at that. You can figure out the rest. This is the Paul McGUIRE Report. We'll be back in just a second. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. Once again, you're now listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. By the way, back to the fogginess in my throat, and the operative word is fog. From where I live, which is somewhat elevated, I look down on a valley. Above me, there are all kinds of planes and jets that fly. But because of where I am, location-wise, early in the mornings when I look at the valley and I look at the timing of the sunrise, what happens is that chemtrails are dispersed very heavily over this entire area and many, many, many other areas all across America. And chemtrails contain a wide assortment of chemicals. And people in Florida have been dealing with this in other places. So there's this conspicuous fog that's been coming in on a regular basis. Now, people in Florida and other places across the nation have analyzed the fog, and it contains certain ingredients that facilitate certain health reactions, okay? That's why you've always got to, do what you got to do. I had to say it that way. I'm sorry. You got to do what you got to do. So the other thing is, what I want to do just very briefly, and we'll take up on it more, is I want to give you what I would call a predictive analysis of potential events that I believe are soon coming to many areas of America and the world in the near future. So let's start with the foundational premise. The foundational premise is that we are still engaged in what I have called the greatest battle for the hearts and minds of mankind in the history of the world, which is the title of one of my books, and it breaks down the nature of the battle that we're in. So that battle has not gone away, and because the battle has not gone away, the ancillary after effects will continue, okay? And so that's a no-brainer. So the other foundational understanding is the people you know need to know about the reality of this battle from credible witnesses that have done some kind of homework. And the way you develop those conversations is with great subtlety on an incremental basis in carefully monitored, specified amounts. What do I mean by that? Your average person can only take a download of truth and facts at a certain speed rate or at a certain delivery rate. If you deliver a payload of truth which is really intense, and if you deliver it to the average person too quickly, and you don't dose it out in an incremental or paced manner, a blowback psychological defense mechanism will happen. There will be too much truth delivered to an individual. They will not be able to assimilate that truth in the speed that is necessary to digest it without being overwhelmed, dazed and confused, or going into some kind of state of cognitive dissonance. So you've got to be kind of like a fisherman. I don't know a whole lot about fishing, but I know enough to know that a good fisherman knows where to cast his line, knows where to pick the right location for fishing, knows the best time of the day or evening for fishing, knows what kind of bait will work and what kind of bait will cause the fish to swim away. Well, when you're planting seeds of thoughts and seeds of truth to people, you have to employ many of the disciplines that a fisherman employs in order to successfully catch fish, or in this case, successfully make sure that you are spreading the actual truth in a seed-like form in an incremental and paced basis. Because it's only when you do it properly that you have the highest statistical percentage or rate of seeing that truth not rejected, but that truth actually embeds in different human personalities. And then that truth goes through a process of germinating in different personalities, even if they were initially highly resistant to what you had to say. If you allow a certain time to pass, people will get over their initial resistance. In fact, the memory of that resistance will fade into the past, and you will be able to start with a clean slate, or you'll be able to start completely fresh with a fresh approach. You don't go repeating the same thing that failed the first 4 times you use it. That's like imbecilic. You use a fresh new approach. You monitor carefully. Is there an immediate potential of receptivity, or is there the possibility of, on a long-term basis, of internal transformation or receptivity? And then you employ the proper mechanism as needed. Well, it's like baking a chocolate chip cookies. So those are that you bake homemade, not homemade, the kind you use, the store mix. Okay, so the way you bake chocolate chip cookies is you follow the recipe. You can add or diminish from the recipe, but you better know what you're doing, because you can only foul it up. So to have delicious chocolate chip cookies, you can mix some non-funky tasting oil. You don't use cooking oil. You don't use oil that your body receives like it would receive motor oil out of your car, because you're just going to clog your arteries and have a heart attack. You use organic oils that your body will absorb and are actually healthy. You might, if you really are into the taste, which I am, you can get creative, but you're going to have to, run some risks. You might create an additional add-on to the recipe where it talks about a stick of butter being used. You might cut the stick of butter into half a stick of butter, and then use the remaining amount in an organic oil that doesn't have a bitter taste. Okay? A virgin olive oil that's not bitter tasting, that doesn't have garlic in it, that tastes like, well, it has a very pure, delicious taste. It doesn't have any distracting, tangy taste. And so you would cut a half a stick of not margarine, because margarine is motor oil, a half a stick of butter, and then what you remove with the half a stick of butter, you can add in the equivalent of a half of a stick of some kind of organic, virgin, non-tasting oil, okay? And then you mix it up with the water, or sometimes you might add milk to make it richer. You stir it up properly. You put in an egg or two if it requires it. I usually throw in at least one egg. That's you got to make a judgment call, because I don't want to eat something that is totally devoid of anything of protein. And then you buy you got to know the reputation of the company that's making the cookie mix, because garbage in, garbage out. Good tasting ingredients. I'm not talking about excitotoxins that fool you into thinking it's good tasting, but you're really eating the waste product of a laboratory somewhere. No, you want it to taste good. So you want the chocolate to be good. You want the cookie mix to be good. And then you cook it the proper amount of time, or under slightly if you like it a more chewy, soft chocolate chip cookie. And I do this. I used to put up my recipe, because there were a lot of other things I would add into it on the website. This was many years ago. I'd have my organic pancake recipe I put up and other stuff. But this just is off the cuff. I like nuts in my chocolate chip cookies, or I feel cheated, immensely cheated. So I'll find some decent walnuts, maybe organic walnuts if I can find them. Stir it up real good, cook it the appropriate amount of time, and make sure I put in not too little, not too much of the walnuts, because I find the walnuts in the chocolate chip, or pecans. Yes, definitely. I prefer pecans over walnuts. It just hit me like a flash of light. No, I'm being facetious. I'm being facetious. It hit me, but not like a flash of light. It hooked me. It hit me with hunger pains of how much I like chocolate chip cookies with pecans in them, for crying out loud. And those taste delicious. So, enjoy it. Enjoy it. And let me know how it went. Okay, so back to the reality that we're currently in, a battle for the hearts and minds of mankind. Okay, so you got to know what's coming up against you, and I'm going to touch on that on this edition of the Paul McGUIRE Report. By the way, I need you to watch my back. I've told you how you can do that, but some of you actually need to do it. That's how you help. If you're thinking, I can only electronically be a watcher and liker of the Paul McGUIRE Report if I agree with everything he says. Now, let me just give you my opinion, nothing more, nothing less, okay? If you're waiting before you electronically like or electronically follow somebody on the internet, if you're waiting to cast your vote, so to speak, on the basis that you've got to agree with that individual, in this case, we're talking about me. If you got to agree with them 100%, or agree with everything they say 100%, and it's only then and if then that you would electronically like them or electronically follow them. May I simply ask you to consider this? Paul McGUIRE doesn't always agree with his own self on a daily basis. On a daily basis, a week-to-week basis, and definitely on a year-to-year basis or longer, I change my perspective and change my viewpoints and change all kinds of things as I mature, as I grow, as I acquire new information. I'm constantly in a process of reevaluating what I say and what I believe, because I'm not God. You already knew that, but I have to remind some people, because they give me the same standard to meet as God, and I'm never going to meet it, folks. I'm not going to meet it, and neither will you. So may I ask you to consider this? If you're waiting regarding anybody on the internet or media or whatever, and if you're only waiting for the idyllic time of when you can totally agree with everything they believe in and everything they say, theologically, current events, politically, everything, that you agree with them 100% in every category, and then and only then will you choose to electronically like them or electronically follow them, or respond to the Lord in terms of giving a donation or a contribution in the amount that the Lord calls you to do. If the only time you're going to give a donation or contribution is if the time comes that you'll agree with everything I believe, everything I say in ministry, if you're waiting for that idyllic time, guess what? It's never going to happen. It's not going to happen with me or anybody else that you may. Many of you just partially like me. Some of you like me a lot. But look, the point is this. You change in your beliefs and your perspective as you gain knowledge, as you acquire more information, as you hear more about an individual. There are a lot of people, if I wanted to tell you their real background, you'd be shocked. Well, I don't go around shooting off my mouth. It's not that I'm afraid to. It's just that I try to be strategic in everything that I do. So the point I'm trying to make is you need to be able to, and I'm not just speaking of me, I'm speaking of anyone that you would consider electronically liking, electronically following, or giving a donation or a contribution to. Nobody, there's probably nobody except God that you're going to agree with in everything they say, everything they do, everything they believe in, the way they do it. You're not going to find these people. They don't exist. So you're going to have to settle for. You say, oh, I don't want to settle. Well, the only one that you won't have to settle with is God. Because all the rest of us are fallen men and women. So I don't even agree with everything I believe in and say in, et cetera, et cetera. And I have to constantly revise myself as I learn more, as I'm exposed to more truth, as God takes the blindness from my eyes. Because we all are guilty of that. So I'm not telling you what to do. I'm encouraging you to consider the possibility that the Lord might have you, and I'm talking about me because that's what we're doing right now, that the Lord might have you electronically follow me, electronically like me, or even make a contribution or a donation, not because you agree with everything I say or everything I believe, but because you agree with a whole lot of it. And the whole lot of it that you agree with regarding me is important to our survival together, our family's survival, and it's important to the survival of America and our freedoms, and it's important to the survival of a whole lot of things. Okay? And so it's on that basis that I'm asking you to reconsider and electronically vote to like me or electronically vote to follow me or give a donation. Not on the basis of you agree with me in every area perfectly. My wife doesn't agree with me in every area perfectly. I've been married to my wife for 40 years. Guess why I'm not divorced, among many reasons? I'm not divorced, and I'm not saying I'm better than anybody. I'm not. Believe me, I am not better than any one of you. But the reason I'm not divorced and I've been married to my wife for 40 years is I had to learn the hard way, like most of you, the basics of marriage, which is the husband and wife are not going to agree on everything or see everything the same way. It's not going to happen. Husband and wife are going to disagree. They're going to have different points of view. They're going to have different perspectives. They're not always going to see things the same exact way. So then what do? Well, you still love one another. You're still married, but you learn how to navigate as best you can in an imperfect world. And you learn to love one another, not by surrendering your core beliefs, not by selling out to the truth, but step by step, day by day, you learn how to navigate through the turbulent waters that we live in, and you come up with the best solution you can. Now, of course, there are certain areas that are non-negotiable. And that goes not only for marriage, it goes for, people that would want to evaluate somebody for the internet or social media, liking or following or donating or whatever. For example, if I was to be communicating on a regular basis that there are many ways to God and Jesus Christ is not the only way to God, well, that's a deal breaker. That's cause for no. I can't support him. I can't like him. I can't because that is such an important truth that you can't. It's non-negotiable. Okay, so you got to learn how to discern the non-negotiable truths from the truths that not selling out, because you're not about selling out, and I'm not about selling out, but where there is potentially some room for degrees of disagreement or different opinions. And then you move ahead accordingly. Now, fortunately, I try to monitor what I say. Well, not I try. I do monitor what I say carefully. And I go to great pains to make sure I don't even inadvertently say something stupid or infer something stupid, like there are many ways to God. Jesus Christ is just one. The Bible emphatically does not teach that. And as such, because I'm under command, so to speak, to the Word of God, I could never say that. And you should not be supporting anybody to a large degree or to whatever degree if they're communicating a message which at its very core is diametrically opposed to what you believe. And you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so I need you to help us in this warfare. Now, there are certain situations, well, we'll pick that up later on, because it's not a shoe store, like one size fits all. It's much more delicate than that. Okay, so you have to be aware that the multiple level wars we're involved in. We're in a time period where technology and science has brought into our realities entirely new technologies, entirely new sciences that shape and change and radically transform the nature of the battlefield landscape as we now know it. So let's just take one right from thin air. I believe that the Bible teaches us that I don't believe that the high level authority of the prophets in the Old Testament exists today in the church. This makes me the friends, by the way, of basically no one, just so you know. I pay a huge price for that because the prophetic movement doesn't like that. And the non-prophetic movement doesn't like that. So, you know, I'm last man standing in an old Western saloon where everybody's drunk, heavily armed, and I forgot to bring my weapon. And it's not pleasant, but that's what I really believe. I believe that in terms of, are there prophets of the level of Ezekiel, Daniel, and so on and so forth? Are the heavy duty prophets of the Old Testament, are they alive and well today? No, I do not believe that that level of prophet is alive today. Why? Because the final standard for that level of prophet is that you have to have 100% accuracy in your prophecies, or you are to be killed for being a false prophet, according to the Old Testament. Okay. However, I do believe that the gift of prophecy, or the gifts of prophecies, or in some cases, prophets as outlined in the New Testament prophets, not Old Testament prophets, I believe that various gifts of prophecy, various supernatural gifts are available to members of the body of Christ today. I believe that certain things like biblically based visions and dreams and prophecies can be available today among people who have the various gifts of prophecy. But let's not confuse the two, because there's a lot of people who are legitimately exercising biblical gifts of prophecy, but they make statements like they name an exact date for the time and place that Christ will return, which the Bible says is impossible. Or they issue a false prophecy about something coming to happen in the future and it doesn't happen. That's a false prophecy. Well, they're not stoned to death and murdered because those prophets were never supposed to be categorized at the level of an Old Testament prophet to begin with. So you see, in a sense, if you look at the Bible with the built-in specifics that the Bible communicates, the Bible is very clear. Yes, there are prophets today. Yes, there are prophetic gifts today, but not at the same level of authority and anointing that the Old Testament prophets had. And it's very important to get this right. So what we're talking about is two different categories of prophets. Now, there are, to that community that is open to prophetic gifts, the exercising of prophetic gifts, to that community that relies or elevates certain men and sometimes women to be prophets, I would say this. Among the various communities in the evangelical movement, the charismatic movement, and other moves or movements of God within the Christian church, there is a a significant percentage that believe in various prophetic gifts and various kinds of prophets. And I've heard people with dreams that they said they had, visions they claimed to have, all kinds of supernatural experiences. Jesus took them up to heaven, on and on and on, in which Jesus, or the prophetic dream or the prophetic vision, gave them a clear map of predictions about what was going to happen supernaturally in the future. So it was a supernatural revelation that they claim was given to them by God regarding the immediate future, a couple of years down the line, or somewhere in the future. And these people claim that God spoke to them and gave them this vision, dream, or prophecy, or whatever. And I have been troubled in my spirit when I've heard this many times. It didn't ring true to me. I kept my mouth shut. It didn't ring true to me. In my spirit, I felt that something was off. And this is what I want to briefly talk about. In many of the cases, it turned out that the track record of the prophet, the so-called prophet, New Testament prophet, that the track record was somewhat wobbly. They had committed a number of serious bloopers, which potentially discredits them, potentially, unless there's restoration. So that's one problem. Another problem is there were a fair number of people who had these elaborate prophecies, and these prophecies never came true in the way that they said they would come true. Well, I have a problem with that also. So the question you have to then ask yourself is, what was the origination point of these so-called and alleged supernatural prophecies being issued by so-called New Testament prophets, who some of them are famous within certain charismatic prophetic communities? It obviously could not have been the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit isn't confused, and the Holy Spirit doesn't make serious errors if it claims to give you a prediction of the future. That's one. Number two is, there is the potential that a influence of a false prophet or influence of a demonic spirit could have interjected. I'm not claiming these people were demon possessed. I'm rather claiming the theological term that potentially these people were demonized, which means they weren't demon possessed, but they were influenced externally from a demon. That a demon externally influenced them, and that a demon may have given them a false prediction of the future in terms of a vision or a dream or whatever. And so it could have been a case of externalization from a demon that influenced them. And therefore, the root of it was not the Holy Spirit, but an unholy spirit or a demonic spirit. Okay, most people are familiar with what we just said to one degree or another. But here is the flashing red light, and I think it's number 5 or 4, I forgot, I'm sorry. But the point is, this one here is a flashing red light in which the body of Christ needs to immediately get up to speed, become aware, become educated regarding existing high technologies, existing sciences that now exist, that are now operational, and have been operational for decades. Because you can't navigate through our contemporary reality. You can't navigate through the world of prophecy from God or prophecy from a demonic spirit. You can't navigate in a lot of challenging places if you don't have an up-to-date, thorough understanding of just exactly what and what cannot be done by highly advanced operational technologies and sciences that, yes, they are operational right now at this very moment. Now, what I'm talking about is, and I've talked to you, I've given you documentation in my books. I've given you documentation on the Paul McGUIRE report. I've given you documentation in interviews I've done. Okay? I've been talking about this. I've been bringing people up to speed about this for decades. Hello? I've been around a while, not Johnny come lately. And I learned through study, through research, through documentation, that there exists a wide diversity of what could be called new technologies and sciences and new technologies and sciences that have been weaponized in that they are fully operational and being used by not only our military, but by major militaries around the world. I am talking about things like, and this one's been around for like 25 years. This technology has been operational for over 2 decades. It's called voice-to-skull technology. A person hears a voice in their brain, voice to skull. But they think the voice is God. They think the voice is the Holy Spirit. They think the voice is an alien. They think the voice is any number of potential things. So is that person crazy? Are they nuts? Do they need medication? Is a demon speaking to them? Are they demon possessed? Is it a false prophet speaking to them? What is the origination point of this voice to skull technology? What is the origination point of the voice they hear clearly in their skull or brain? I believe this to be true through my study and research. I think it is a large threat, but it hasn't been talked about. And do me a favor, if you talk about it and you're getting the information from me, do me the common courtesy and the common integrity of giving me the credit or copyright credit. I'm letting you use it for free. Just give me a credit as the source, because that saves me a lot of grief. Okay, so a lot of what some people think are legitimate prophecies from legitimate prophets of God, a lot of people who claim to have heard a supernatural voice inside their brain, a lot of people who claim to have heard God speaking to them in their brain, a lot of people who claim all kinds of communication between them and God or an angel, or in some cases, people think it's a demon speaking to them. The reality is they were incorrect in their analysis concerning every potential origination point. The reality is that the technology that's been around for at least 25 years, known as voice-to-skull technology, was used upon them, for lack of better words. Somebody somewhere, it could have been miles away, it could have been next door, it could have been in a car next to where you are on the freeway. It could have potentially been from a satellite circling overhead. Any number of potential broadcasting systems that you're not even sure are broadcasting systems. And let me add one, this is definitely not going to be good, but let me add one to it, and that would be origination points of the broadcast in terms of voice-to-skull technology that come from the body, the brain, or the biological body or the brain, and it comes from a bot or a nanobot that can broadcast and receive and transmit in the spectrum of voice-to-skull technology. So the broadcasting tower, I'm speaking in metaphorical terms purely, the actual broadcasting tower exists and lives on a nano level, on a microscopic level. The broadcasting tower lives within your own body or brain. Now, I remember in the heydays of being a nationally syndicated radio talk show host of the Paul McGUIRE Show on tons of FM stations and AM stations across America. And when I would drive around any geographic region, like California or anywhere, I would often see from the highway a giant broadcasting tower. And you've seen them too. They're not as common today as they were a while back. You see a flashing red light on the very top of the AM or FM broadcasting tower. You'd see the call letters of the tower on a placard on the very top of the radio broadcasting tower. And so people knew what a radio broadcasting tower looked like. Well, that technology can produce a similar covert effect because they invented a nano broadcasting tower technology that is the size of something microscopic. It's not shaped like a conventional AM or FM broadcasting tower. It's a nanobot transmitter that is so small that it's microscopic. And it can fulfill these goals. It can broadcast a voice in your head that you think is God or an angel, or a voice in your head that you think is from other source and you don't understand because you're living in the zone that's called I am biased from the truth because I'm ignorant of existing and operational science fiction-like and future technologies and sciences. Let me say that again if I can possibly do it. I am being victimized by technologies because I don't believe they exist, because I am biased against the reality and existence of science fiction-like technologies, and therefore I can't believe that they actually exist, and therefore I totally disregard them as a possibility, as a potential explanation for the voices that I hear in my head, or the voice of another person, another being or entity that I hear inside my head. And so I go to my default mental position in which I falsely assume that these voices are from God or are from an angel or from some other source. And the only reason I'm making that false choice is because of my bias. I don't believe in the existence or the operational ability of highly futuristic and advanced technologies that have been operational for at least 25 years. And so that's where we are. And so in order to move to the next step, you have to understand these basics. So I think that there's a certain percentage of people claiming to have dreams, claiming to have prophecies, claiming that God spoke to them, and all kinds of stuff. And it's very vivid. They're convinced it's real. They heard an actual voice and all kinds of things. But because they're unaware of the existence of certain technologies which have been operational for over 25 years, that has produced an intellectual perception bias in them, which causes them to deny, causes them to disregard the very real possibility that the so-called voice that they heard in their head, the dream that they saw, the vivid vision that they saw, and all the other things were really the product of a highly advanced operational technology that can produce vivid pictures, vivid video, vivid audio, vivid sound in your head, your brain, and your body. You can see schematic maps and engineering diagrams in your head. But they're not coming to you from heaven or Satan or wherever you think it's coming from. They're coming to you from an electromagnetic frequency broadcast that is not proof that you're insane, psychotic, or nuts, because that's where people think they go there too. No, if you knew, and you should know, I'm telling you right now, so there's no excuse for you to say you don't know continually. You do know, because I told you. I've told you for years. I've told you in my books. So I'm tired of hearing you don't know. You do know, you just didn't choose to believe. And because you didn't choose to believe, and I supplied you with documentation, I used credible sources. So you're being hampered in many ways. You're being boxed in many ways, including your credibility, because you think that a technologically produced vision or voice was from God, an angel, an entity, a demon, an ET, God knows what. But you missed the boat because you didn't bother to believe in the reality of highly advanced technological weapons and sciences like voice-to-skull technology and even newer technologies that can broadcast vividly clear video pictures in your head with narration. Yes, they're operational. Get over your stuck-in-the-mud, basic, non-rational bias. You've boiled everything down to a bunch of garbage. So you believe in garbage and not the truth. You believe because you don't believe that these technologies exist and you have no proof that they don't exist, whereas I have tons of proof that they do exist. You have arrived at a faulty conclusion. You have arrived at the totally false belief that these vivid visions, these vivid words, these vivid narrations couldn't possibly be broadcast into your body and brain via a brand new technology employing electromagnetic frequencies and things like Tesla technology. You don't believe that that's possible. But if we press you on it, you don't have a valid argument or you don't have valid proof to support your belief system. And as such, there exists a highly sophisticated scientific occult elite that have been around a long time. And they are very, very savvy when it comes to the employment, the development, the invention, and the usage of these of an endless parade of highly advanced sciences and technologies, which can beam pictures, voices, videos, visions, anything you want, made to order, can be projected with lifelike reality inside your head. And that's a fact. I've done my homework. I have the research. It's in my books. There's segments of each truth in my books at paulmcguire.us. I've been talking about it for decades, for crying out loud. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So what this comes down to, because see, this is a problem for you, a problem for me. You have, not on purpose, and I'm speaking this to you in love right now, so don't get mad at me. I'm speaking the truth in love to you. I'm telling you this because I love you. Inadvertently, it was not necessarily intentional on your part, but you have chosen or you have opted for becoming a real impediment, a blockage. You have become a stumbling block, a blockage, an interruption to an ongoing spiritual warfare of eternal magnitude. Because you have chosen a mindset of unbelief, you have shut the doors, virtually and physically, to the downloading of all kinds of highly advanced information regarding technology, sciences, genetics, quantum physics, a download that is so important that God is attempting to send his people from heaven, a download that would equip God's people and raise the bar of their knowledge on a quantum level. You see, God has given us the ability, the supernatural power, and potentially the knowledge to be overcomers and to be victorious right now in space and time. We have been given the power by God to be total overcomers in the great spiritual battle. And therefore, the tide of the great spiritual battle can turn direction. We should be moving with acceleration. We should be moving with vast quantum momentum into a future time zone of unbelievable victory that God desires for us before he returns. Because if we do not realize this unbelievable victory, and it's not unbelievable, it's actually believable if you choose to, we can rule the future. I wrote a book about it. I have some copies, not many. I wrote it a long time ago. It was called Who Will Rule the Future? Well, definitely not the stupid. Who will rule the future? We can turn the tide of this battle right now. We can turn the tide of what's happening in America right now. We can turn the tide of many of the most difficult challenges and problems we face. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. If you've done your homework, and you can, if you study the facts and seek the face of God, and you can, God will show you the future. And to those God shows the future, he gives this profound ability to rule the future. And so that's what we do. We don't argue with God. We don't disbelieve God. We believe God. With God, all things are possible. So I ask you, with everything in me, because I'm all in, are you? I said, I'm all in, are you? Are the people you know all in? And let's be honest together. We can't all say yes, can we? So part of our job, if we claim to be all in, is to definitely make sure that the people we love are all in. You can't be all about loving your neighbor as yourself and loving one another as Christ loved the church if you're not all in. So I want to close on those words. This is Paul McGuire. Be sure to visit paulmcguire.us. Do the few simple things I ask you to do, please. Secondly, I want to ask you the question that I have to constantly ask myself, which is, Paul, and you use your name, not my name, are you all in? And then if I claim to say yes, I could, with my imagination, hear a voice that says, prove it. Well, the point is, I have to prove it. So do you. Believe God. When you believe God, all things are possible. That's your proof. God bless you. This is Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us.